a growing dilemma over whether to recognize the Taliban as the ruler of Afghanistan. Since the August 15 takeover of Kabul, world powers have opened up channels of communication with the group, but made clear this does not automatically confer recognition. This week, the Taliban asked for a chance to address the United Nations General Assembly, but the international body demanded that the Taliban first include women in their cabinet. The Taliban has incrementally stripped away freedom for women, excluding girls from secondary schools, telling working women to stay at home, and unveiling an all-male government. Now, we're just going to take you to this bite before we speak to Shenilla to weigh in on this.
Women and girls in that region, in Afghanistan and in South Asia, are not unfamiliar with what is happening in Afghanistan right now. This has happened 20 years ago in Afghanistan. This was the situation in 2007 in Swat Valley when the Pakistani Taliban announced ban on girls' education. They stopped women from going to markets. They targeted women. So, the atrocities are countless when it comes to the terrorism and the extremism that the Taliban have spread in that region. And my worry is that this will continue in Afghanistan. My worry is that the same situation would repeat all over again, what has happened over the past, before 20 years and even during that time in different districts, in different places. What needs to be done is that the international community must take this matter seriously. We cannot make compromises on the protection of women's rights and on the protection of human dignity.
Right. So to weigh in on this and other developments, we are now joined by the Executive Director of Amnesty International, Shenilla Mohamed. Shenilla, a very good morning. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Just that bite, or on its own, just really paints a very grim picture of what's happening in Afghanistan at the moment. What are your views?
Good morning, Butle, and good morning to your viewers. Yes, Amnesty International has been documenting human rights violations in Afghanistan during the last rule of the Taliban, during the rule of the coalition government, and even till today. Since last month when the Taliban took over, we have seen a systematic dismantling of all the human rights gains that have been made over the years. I mean, we have documented cases of the brutal slaughter of ethnic Hazara minorities. We have documented cases of women whose rights are being violated, women who are not being allowed to go to school or to work. There is, and of course we know that journalists are being targeted. So there has been a brutal dismantling of any human rights gains. And, our concern really is exactly what was reflected by your, the lady in your soundbite, that, they are not serious. They are just playing to the international community, saying what they think the international community wants to hear. But the reality on the ground is extremely different. And already we are seeing that they have gone back to their old ways. And that's for a very simple reason, Butler. They do not believe in human rights, and they do not believe in the rights of women. So whatever they say on an international stage is not the reality of their practice and their beliefs.
I mean, we saw that, right at the start, and they sent propaganda videos of a better Afghanistan and a different rule under them, essentially. But that hasn't been the case. Let's talk about the fact that they want to address the UN General Assembly. What would they be trying to achieve with that?
Well, again, it's a continuation of this PR strategy that they have thrown at the world, where they basically are saying, look at us, we are reformed, we are ready to become members of the international community, but we know that that is not true. So, they want, so what they are saying in essence, Butler, is recognize us, give us international standard, and then let's talk about our human rights violations. We're willing to listen to you, but that doesn't mean they're willing to do anything about it. And of course, the international community is saying, no, fix your human rights record. Stop doing the things that you are doing. Then we will consider recognizing you. So, they are just trying very hard to be recognized, but they are not willing to adhere to the values of the international community, of the majority of the international community. And so, this is once again another PR stunt. And of course, they also want to, get rid of the UN representative that is there at the moment. So, they're trying to replace him with their own person. And this is going to be difficult for them. It's not going to be easy.
Of course, I mean, that representative, Ghulam Isaaqzai, currently the Afghanistan representative recognized by the UN at the moment. They, of course, want to go in and put in Sohail Shaheen. Now, Isaaqzai is going to be speaking, I believe, towards the end of the General Assembly. What then does that do for the mouthpiece of Afghanistan? Because essentially, he is not recognized by the Taliban as somebody who is speaking on their mission.
Well, look, the question of who speaks for Afghanistan has now landed in the lap of the UN General Assembly's 9-member credentialing committee, and these include the United States, Russia, and China. So the committee is tasked with addressing the claim and making a recommendation and sending it back to the Secretary General or the General Assembly, which will then debate and accept or reject it. Now, as a body, Butle, the UN does not formally recognize governments, and I think that's an important point. Instead, it recognizes the official representatives of its member states. Now, Afghanistan is a member state. The committee isn't expected to meet before the close of the United Nations General Assembly. So the Taliban representative is unlikely to speak this year. But while Isaaqzai remains in the seat for now, it is unclear whether some countries will object to him speaking next week. So, there may be an objection put up by the supporters of the Taliban who might prevent Isaaqzai from speaking, but the Taliban definitely won't be speaking at this year's UN General Assembly because, there has to be a credentials committee meeting, unless, of course, this is expedited, which I doubt, but, anything is possible. Now, we know that one of the criteria, of course, for being recognized by the UN is your human rights record. And we know that in 1974, South Africa was suspended and they were not reinstated until apartheid fell. So, human rights violations are one of the major criteria for recognition. And we, as Amnesty and other human rights organizations, have been, for this reason, systematically documenting human rights violations because we don't want the world to get caught up in the PR rhetoric. We want to present evidence that they have not changed, that the human rights violations are taking place in full force, and that recognition of them at this stage would really compromise the rights of women, the rights of ethnic minorities. And, we're not talking about small violations. They are being brutally murdered, killed. Journalists are being trapped like dogs. I mean, it's just horrendous what is happening on the ground.
Now, I mean, we saw Qatar coming out and essentially at the UN General Assembly and saying that the international community need to continue to engage with Afghanistan. Why is that so important, and what more can the international community do to support the country, or should I say the people of the country, without necessarily supporting the Taliban?
Well, we know that the United Nations has released millions of dollars in relief funding for Afghanistan to help the people. And we think that, that is a good thing and that should continue. On the other hand, I think engagement and dialogue is always critically important. And I think the international community has also, in this engagement and dialogue, has got to send a loud and strong message to Afghanistan that if you are serious about reforms, it shouldn't just be trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the international community, but it should be genuine, and that they should be honest about the limitations of reforms. What is it that they are willing to do? What is it that they're not willing to do, instead of lying to the international community? Because, it makes it very difficult to dialogue with someone who is disingenuous, who is totally saying what they think you want to hear, but on the ground knows that they're not going to do any of it. So I think that the dialogue has got to be based on a trust and honesty basis, and there is need for continued dialogue, because the last thing we want is Afghanistan to become a pariah state, and then terrorism continues to flourish in that part of the world. So there has to be dialogue, but I think acceptance in the international community until they do not reform in the way that they are promising to should never happen, because once that happens, the reform becomes even more difficult.
the Executive Director of Amnesty International. Shenilla Mohamed, thank you so much for your time this morning.